Hi, today I'm covering a case which from the outset seems rather simple, but when you get down to the brass tacks, there's just something off about it, and a lot of people who have looked into the case seem to not be able to quite put their finger on why it creeps them out or why they find it disturbing. Many believe that it's just because of how vague the details are or how strange the setup for the final moments of the man's life really were. It all started on December 15th, 1973, when a woman by the name of Lucy May returned to her New Orleans home to find that her husband, 73-year-old Alan Robichaux, had gone missing. Now, this was highly unusual for Alan since he rarely did anything even remotely close to this, which led Lucy to calling the police and initiating a manhunt. A few weeks later, authorities would find his abandoned car just a few blocks away from their house. After that, the investigation hit a dead end, since the car provided no other clues. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of a theft. It was just abandoned, and without any leads, the case would go cold. Lucy May, now alone, would continue to live in the same house for a few more years before selling it. And over the following decades, the house would have various occupants, none of whom would have anything of note to recount. That is, until 1991, almost 20 years after Alan's disappearance, when the homeowners at the time discovered a termite infestation in their crawl space under the house, which led them to call an exterminator, who would then go into the crawl space looking for the source of the infestation. Then, much to his surprise, towards the back of the crawl space was a concrete wall with a metal plate at the center, which shouldn't have been there. Nothing in the house's plans, blueprints, or any of the past owner's recollection even hinted at such a structure. And when they pulled the plate away, they found a small, dusty chamber, and within that chamber, they found a human skull. When the police arrived to investigate this, they found the entirety of a human skeleton inside what would be called a concrete porch within the two-family dwelling where Robichaux once lived. This chamber was so confined that the police had to cut a hole in the wall from the outside to get into it proper, and what they found inside was bizarre to say the least. Inside this space, which was barely big enough for a person, they found the entirety of a human male skeleton lying on its back with a green duffel bag by its head, and these remains showed that the body was either naked when it died or its clothes had completely rotted away, as the skeleton was only wearing a pair of socks. Upon further inspection, they would find a wound to the skull that showed that the man had died from a bullet to the head, in particular one of a .38 caliber pistol, which was also found near the body, and there was blood splatter on the chamber of the walls, which confirmed that the man had been shot in the same place where the body had been found. Now, many believe it was most likely a self-inflicted wound. However, the most bizarre detail was that the body was surrounded by strange trinkets and artifacts placed all around the chamber, almost in a ritualistic way, which has led people to believe some rather wild things. Many of these were Alan's known belongings, including a strange porcelain statue, a mirror, some toys from his childhood, burnt-out candles, and other such curios. Now, other than the hole in the head, the skeleton was almost perfectly intact. Its dark-colored socks seemed almost strange on the remains, and at its feet was a rather curious colored ceramic statue. Anthropologists from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge would eventually be called in to identify the skeleton, to determine its age, race, and sex, along with how long it had been there. After emerging from the 2-foot-high crawl space, LSU forensic anthropologist Mary Mahan could only confirm that the skeleton appeared to be that of a male. She estimated it had been there for at least a year, but possibly as long as 20 years. And of course, the body turned out to be that of Robichaux. And in short order, the death would be ruled a self-termination. Almost 20 years after his disappearance, the mystery behind the disappearance itself was solved. However, this raised a series of new questions. Now, what's made things even more frustrating for many is the fact that there is little to no information of Alan's life around the time of his disappearance, which has left a lot of room for people to speculate on whether he self-terminated or someone else was involved. Aside from the relationship with his wife, there is little we really know about the man. We know that they had been married for around 30 years and had multiple children together. We also know that he was what many would call a typical family man, which makes his potential actions, including leaving his wife without a note or telling her anything, rather strange and out of place. The tomb the man chose for himself is also rather strange. It seems that he had spent a lot of time preparing this hidden area, which was barely bigger than a coffin. The opening was so small that a grown adult could barely just squeeze in, and such a small room was it that the objects he took in with him would have had to been carefully selected, not to prevent his entry. Investigators also could not ascertain whether he visited the spot regularly or if he had just finished it prior to committing the act. But the image of a 73-year-old man crawling into a 2-foot tall little room within a cellar, carrying a bunch of little toys and statuettes, completely in the buff, seems rather strange. Just the image alone of Alan's final horrifying moments within that tiny constrained space seem nightmarish, to the point that some argue around whether he crawled in or was forced to crawl into that tiny room, with a metal plate which would have had to been slid into place, with only statuettes and toys around him as the candle's flickering flames slowly died out. The abandoned car itself seems like a rather strange detail. If this was an act of self-termination, then why was his car just randomly found at such a distance from his house? The going theory for many is that Alan had abandoned his car, then like any 73-year-old man would do, he quickly raced back home and snuck into the house in an attempt to hide the location of his body for some unknown reason. Some believe that he was doing this to keep his family from knowing that he self-terminated. However, some people firmly believe that Alan was either forced to self-terminate or was aided by someone else in the entirety of the process. However, it's much more likely that this was a case of self-termination, as investigators have noted. And while there are all sorts of theories and ideas surrounding the case, along with questions such as what was the significance of the chamber itself and the items placed within, why do some records seem to imply that the plate looked like it was fixed into place from the outside, which of course has led many to believe that there was a second person involved. Then there's the question of, if he was going to end it all within his own home, why was he so afraid of his family discovering the body? Would it not have been easier just to do it someplace else, which would be more likely to keep his family from finding out what he did? Also, many raise the questions, why didn't anyone smell even a hint of a rotting corpse under their feet for so many years? The smell of a decaying body under your feet in a regular house isn't something that's particularly easy to hide. Some theories are as outlandish as it being some demonic ritual or even an insurance scam gone awry. However, in the end, whether Alan's death was a tragic act of self-termination or something more sinister seems like it will always remain a mystery. At most, we have the educated guesses of his final moments in a tiny, carefully prepared chamber filled with personal trinkets as a .38 caliber round went through his head, only after he had seemingly abandoned his car. Despite any theories which would say otherwise, the official conclusion seems like the most likely, one where a man went to great lengths in order to conceal a fate he chose for himself away from his loved ones. However, due to how strange this story is, it really just leaves more questions than answers. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you. And I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.